So, firstly, thank you for coming. Thank you for coming for this. It feels like casual Friday, but on a Monday night. And we wanted to start easily because this isn't television, this is real life. This is where we get to interact with each other. And the Creative Brain Week program, as people were saying, is a program that's evolving quite quickly. It's a kind of magazine program. For some people, it's the British Journal of Medicine. For some people, it's neuroscience. For some people, it's Vogue. For other people, it's Heating and Plumbing Weekly. It changes depending on what particular area you're interested in. And so over the next 3 days, you will get very different kinds of information from here, but you'll also get them out there. So out there is an exhibition. Take time to look at it, because not everybody processes information or generates information or makes knowledge in the same way. And so the guiding principles behind Creative Brain Week are about nothing about us without us. They're about no tell without a show. And they're about each one teach one. And that's really where we're going to start. So we're not trying to just make an event that is a few days and disappears. What happened last year was people were incredibly brave and generous and came and sat and listened, because we could just about do that in COVID. And then they went off. And then about a few months later, they came back and they said, oh, we've started to do this thing. We've started this new project because we were inspired by what we heard. And that's where we're starting this year's program. We're starting this year's program by sharing with you some of the things that people made because of the last 12 months. So I'd like to invite Anusha and Ganza. Do you want to come up? And while you're coming up and taking a seat, can we play that film?
Nosotros venimos de la zona de Cuyo, y la zona de Cuyo es San Juan, Mendoza y San Luis, donde dicen que acá nacen los mejores guitarristas. Lo que decía gente de Buenos Aires, todo, como lo dijo una vez la Patricia Sosa, dijo que ella nunca había visto la clase de guitarristas que ella había conocido, pero que ella entendió que el guitarrista sanjuanino se conforma con estar tocando en un asado y no tomar las cosas seriamente. ¿Qué es lo que nos gusta de tocar? A mí, que yo la paso primero, que toco con mi amigo, que es como un hermano. Nos conocemos de hace tanto tiempo que es un gustazo yo tocar con él. Porque como estábamos viviendo en una casa abandonada, después estuvimos viviendo en la calle, dormíamos en cartones.
¿Te prestaron una guitarra?
Me prestaron una guitarra y me puse a tocar, y un día que no podía sacar un tema, estaba punteando y le dije yo a él que si él podía hacerme esto, y él me dijo que bueno, y después le dije yo, bueno, pues coloca un dedo, ya que podés hacer uno, poner el otro. Hizo eso, entonces le dije, bueno, ahora hacele, y nos hicimos la primera, que era Quiero ser tu sombra, quiero ser tu sombra, lo hicimos. Nunca me gusta pensar mucho el futuro, me gusta más vivir el día a día a mí. Pero algo siempre me va resonando, que ya tengo 52 años, Entonces lo que yo empecé a hacer ahora es tratar de cuidarme de vicios, de alcoholes. Y yo me imagino con él ser viejitos y seguir tocando. Nosotros también podemos hacerlo con gente joven y animarlos a que sigan, porque de verdad que la música es una medicina para toda la vida, en todas las clases de cosas. Después a mí me sucedió algo malísimo. Tuve un conflicto y una persona me pegó un tiro. Entonces yo decidí irme de San Juan y entonces empecé a vivir en la calle. Y cada vez que yo tocaba la guitarra se me olvidaban el problema que yo tenía con este hombre que me había pegado un tiro y que había hecho todo un daño terrible en toda mi familia. Entonces me gustaría a mí darle clase a niños. No importa quizá la sociedad, no importa si están en un buen pasar o en un mal momento económico. Porque sé que se les van a solucionar muchas cosas y que aprendan que a través de una guitarra de la música podés salir de problemas y podés tener una vida muy mejor de la que tenés. Eso es lo que yo siento y me comprometo a hacerlo. Así que ya llegamos, estamos a 2 minutos de llegar a la casa de Gustavo. Todo esto es departamento de Chimba. Sí, esto es Villa Morrones. Así que vamos hacia ahí ahora. Vamos a ver si almorzamos algo, unas empanaditas, comemos algo. Así que bueno, a seguirla pasando bien. Bueno, así que ahora acá estamos llegando a la casa de Gustavo Neira. Así que aquí vamos a encontrarnos con otra gente. Ya te abro la puerta. Papá, que le voy a presentar.
Buenas. Hola, ¿cómo va?
Hola. Habla fuerte.
Hola, ella es mi madre. Mi hermano, mi sobrino, mi hermano, mi sobrina, mi hermano, mi cuñado.
Pasamos por allá, por el fondito, así también el muchacho este nos explica. Venga, Rosa. Va, venga, pasa por acá. Y siempre pensamos cada vez que vamos a tocar en las familias que tenemos y en el entorno que nos rodean a nosotros, que son muy pocos los que nos rodean. 5 amigos tendremos entre los dos, 5 amigos y no tenemos más nadie. De ahí tenemos la familia, cariño, gente conocida, pero nada más. Y siempre nos manejamos así, siempre.
My name is Dominic Campbell. I'm co-founder of Creative Aging International. We are part of an Ideate grant. This is an Atlantic Institute grant, which is looking at can we work with artists and creatives and musicians and dancers and those kind of people to bring brain health to areas where there may be no formal healthcare system or it's difficult to access.
Latin America is full of inequalities and health problems, and as a scientist, I always have a kind of missing part, you know, doing something more with more impact than pure research. So the opportunity to use art to healing, to improving brain health was amazing because Latin America is full of artistic people, but there is no connection with brain health at all.
The clinical people might talk about the inner workings of the brain, and they tend to start from bits of the brain that don't work. You know, you miss a bit of the brain and your arm can't lift, and that's really how the science got built. The art starts in somewhere completely different. It starts from this idea of salutogenesis, the creation of health. And what we've really watched all week is its ability to transcend barriers, particularly barriers of language. The musicians, they understand the notes, they understand the rhythm and the patterns, but they might not have a single word that they can exchange.
Music has this kind of exceptional blending. You know, music activates your language areas of your brain, but also the memory, also the feelings. It's a kind of synergetic blending that happens in the brains, and this is that the music makes the music integrate a huge blending of process in the brain, and because of that it's so powerful.
Bueno, nosotros lo que hemos aprendido acá es que 30 años el cerebro ya se va definiendo. Esto sí nos afirma mucho más. Sí, el saber la alimentación, el saber que un niño en la preadolescencia, la adolescencia, es donde ellos necesitan este cambio, no sé si es un cambio, pero enseñarles algo que ellos aprendan algo.
Apoyarlos más.
We are working with the WHO, and we will work during 2 years to prepare a specific curriculum with different topics like violence in Colombia, tango for Parkinson's disease in Chile and Argentina, improving the educational skills of street musicians like Copa Y Vida. And then after this 2 year period, if we show that we can grow and create collaborations with them, we can apply to direct funding from the WHO.
Entonces para nosotros sería un sueño, una posibilidad enorme de poder ir nosotros con una movilidad de clase a ellos, por ejemplo, en un bus ir a darle a ellos clases, a sus comunidades, hacer una campaña, siempre tener un padre, una madre presente que mire las clases. Y eso hacerlo en las comunidades vulnerables para nosotros sería un sueño tremendo. No sé si hasta ahí terminarían mis sueños, mi vida.
So I know that somewhere out there in internet land, Copa Y Vida are watching on some connection somewhere, so all the love. And I thought that was a great place to start because it introduces many of the themes and some of the people that will pop up throughout the week. Mike Hanrahan and Aline Haas, who you saw in the video, will do a presentation of what they're developing on Thursday. Each day during the... So, to give you a sense of each day starts, as today starts, quite relaxed, with a little morning session, a reflection session on what happened the day before and what may come next. It goes on to give you information for about 2 hours, but it's difficult to process that information sometimes. So then we'll do what we call the living labs, a chance to use art, visual art, dance, theatre, or to take a deeper dive into the neuroscience. And so you can opt into one of those, or even start your own small breakout group if you like. And then in the afternoon, we really present case studies, things that are in process, things that are happening. And in the evening, there's another film. We have a film premiere, Keys, Bags, Names, Words, tomorrow evening in here. And on Wednesday, we have a session about language with Cindy Weinstein online. So that's broadly and briefly the program, which is all online and on your phones, and you can take a look at it. But we want to just stay with what started last year and is developing. So what I'd like to do, if we can connect with her online, is introduce Angelika Sharygina. Yeah, this is where it gets interesting. Hey, fantastic. Hello.
Hello, Dominic.
Hello. This is also our first technical test, so excuse my nervousness. Hello, Angelika. So Angelika is going to start to talk and introduce you to a project that has begun in the last year. So Angelika is a political analyst and researcher with experience in media, propaganda, counterinsurgency, and sustainable policy development. She focuses on identifying and analyzing fake news, harmful content, and extremist groups online. And due to the war in Ukraine, Angelika was forced to flee her home and found refuge in Ireland. In fact, she was one of the first beneficiaries of the visa waiver. So that was this time last year, which was introduced by the Minister of Justice. She came to Ireland on the 27th of February with the support and guidance of the Tech Fugees community. She's a personal mission to tackle misinformation and disinformation, which seems like a really good place to start. The kind of things that she's experienced has been instrumental in the conflict in Ukraine and in relation to forced displacement more broadly. She joined the TREPL lab at TCIN in March 22 as a visiting researcher, and in October 22 enrolled to conduct a PhD entitled Political, Psychological and Economic Consequences of Misinformation and Its Role in Conflict and War, where she's supported, supervised by Professor Dominic Trappell and Professor Rachel Hoare, who she will talk about now, I believe. Angelika, over to you.
Thank you so much, Dominic. It's a great honor, and I'm really privileged to be part of the Creative Brain Week. And it seems like a really incredible event. And thank you so much for your kind introduction. Just before I go into details about the most incredible and amazing research that goes now in the Center for Forced Migration, I'd like to tell a little bit about my story and how I came to Ireland, and basically how grateful I am to Trinity College Dublin, to TCIN, to Global Brain Health Institute, to my amazing supervisors, Dominic Trappell and Dr. Rachel Hoare, for all the support, because it's been a difficult year, just to say the least. So before I came to Ireland, I didn't know anyone, and thanks to the support of Tech Fugees community, I managed to find a new home, new friends, and kind of a new family in Ireland, because when the war started, I was evacuated to Ireland, and it was a really, really tough journey for me. And but I really really very driven to fight disinformation and propaganda. And since February 2022, this has been my main mission. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity to continue my mission in the GBHI and in the Center for Forced Migration, where I learned from the leading experts in the field, and also am able to independently look into the most innovative strategies to intervene in disinformation, propaganda, and fake news that are being spread online. And just a little bit about why this issue is so important to me and why this is a personal mission. I am Afghan Ukrainian, and I've been displaced by the war once, but my father was displaced by the war when Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. And that's why it's kind of a generational thing. And now being a witness and actually experiencing forced migration myself, I know what it is, and I know what it takes to create sustainable policies about involvement of refugees and displaced people in the economies of the hosting states. So I've been very active on that front, and I really believe that war has no race, color, or creed, and everyone can become a refugee. In fact, by 2050, the UN predicts that there will be more than 1 billion refugees worldwide. And this is due to climate change, to different uprisings, to the wars around the world. And we have currently 33 active conflicts around the globe. And that is really something very concerning. And that's why the Center for Forced Migration and the center's mission is really critical in today's world to make sure that we will be prepared to this. So I'd like to tell a little bit about the center. So if you don't mind, could you please show us the slides? Thank you very much. So the Center for Forced Migration Studies is an incredible institution, and I'm really proud to work with Professor Dr. Rachel Hoare, who is the director of the center. And I would like to tell you a little bit more about the development of the center so far, which has been recently established with a launch in September 2022. Can we please have the next slide? Thank you. So, university response to a humanitarian crisis across the world with 33 active conflicts, as I've mentioned, was the launch of the Center for Forced Migration Studies at Trinity College Dublin. And the launch was welcomed by keynotes by incredible professors from Boston College, Professor Teresa Betancourt, Professor Tala Alverson from University of California, San Diego, Professor Dean Cheryl Anderson, University of California, San Diego. And that was, as far as many of you, I remember, were present during the opening of the center, was a great opening and a great starting point for collaboration between institutions that really care about displaced people and involve them in their research. Please, next slide. So, main aims of the center is to foster interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary research, teaching and training in relation to forced migration, and to bridge scholarship, teaching, policy, and practice through developing a collective, collaborative community of intersectional researchers and create opportunities for everyone who is doing their best to tackle issues of forced migration and create sustainable solutions to the issues of forced migration. Next slide, please. And the purpose of the center was to encourage the dialogue and to encourage collaboration between world's leading institutions. That is why three-way collaboration between Trinity College Dublin, Boston College, University of California, San Diego has been one of the key pillars of the development of the center. And a memorandum of understanding is currently being processed between Trinity College and Boston College and Trinity College and the University of California, with a view to developing global research partnerships and grant applications which explore different ways of supporting this the experiences of forced migration. Next slide, please. And I'd like to talk a little bit more about current volunteer initiatives at Trinity College and the University of Sanctuary. So one of the really amazing volunteer-led initiatives are conversation classes for English. And there are so many amazing outcomes for everyone who is involved in those classes. I was participating in those volunteering classes, and for me personally, it was really therapeutical because, first of all, in those classes, there were everyone there were representatives of all countries, and everyone felt welcoming. And we had the situation where Syrians, Somalians, Afghans, Ukrainians were sitting in one group and they were learning about each other's experience. And this was really therapeutical to them because they bridged this connection and they bridged the understanding and they knew that they were not alone. And the center, this action was coordinated by incredible Dr. Brona and Dr. Rachel twice a week, run by staff and student volunteers. And I really would like to tell everyone who is happy to volunteer to join the center, because joining the center is actually helping yourself, because once you are exposed to issues that are going beyond the bubbles that we're used to live in, to issues of forced migration, displacement, war, then the boundaries of your consciousness really, there are no boundaries, and there is so much friendship, so much empathy, and so much cross-cultural collaboration between the volunteers and between the students themselves. So I urge everyone that would like to join this initiative, please join us. And of course, Trinity Sanctuary Psychology Project, coordinated by Professor Kevin. Sorry if I read the surname not correctly, Tularni, and staffed by Trinity clinical psychologist alumni, delivering psychological support to refugees pro bono. And I know that this initiative is really a very difficult one, because psychology support for someone who faced forced migration is a tough task, because this is a lot of traumatic experience. But what the professors and volunteers and students are doing to help those that experience that is really beyond kind and generous with their time and effort. Please, next slide. I guess that's it, and I am very honored to be the part of Trinity College Dublin and to find a home in GBHI and in the Centre for Forced Migration, where collaboratively together with the leading professors, amazing students, amazing volunteers, we keep going on creating solutions for sustainable development, solutions for tackling misinformation, disinformation, to help people access truth, and also to help forced migrants like myself to be more involved and to get the support that they need. Thank you so much.
Angelika, thank you. Thank you so much. Also, thank you. We write these projects, events on paper, and then they happen in real life. And real life things mean things change. And so Angelika was able to step in at the last minute for Rachel Hoare. So we wish Rachel all the best. And I hope what you're beginning to get is a sense of how we think about neuroscience in the world and what we need to do to create the conditions in which brains can be healthy. And so after we finish this news piece, we'll introduce Gráinne McGettrick and Harris Eyre to kind of pull out a little bit, to think about the policy structure and the brain health strategies that we might need to develop. But I have two more bits of news from the two people on the stage and two more people who hopefully will be able to join us online. So next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Ganzamungu Zihindula, who is the founder of the Healthy Rural Society South Africa and a research fellow now in the Department of Psychology at Trinity College. So Dr. Zihindula holds a PhD in public health and has explored the experiences of refugees and asylum seekers accessing healthcare services in South Africa. His work really aims at co-developing, piloting and evaluating transformational simulation delivery model for the promotion of psychological trauma-informed care. And one of the things, many things kind of changed with Dr. Zihindula over the last 12 months, I think, but he's much better able to speak for them himself. He's going to be joined, if we can make the connection work, by Rosemary Nakame. And Rosemary is the founder and executive director of REMI East Africa. So she joins us from Kenya today?
Kenya.
Yeah. So REMI is an organization, a health equity organization, working to improve the health and lives of the poorest people living in the poorest areas. She's an Atlantic Fellow for Health Equity at George Washington University, and many other, I'm trying to find a particular one, sorry. There's a lot here. It's like, Rosemary, I can't keep up with all your abilities. That's really my fault. 2018 US Department of State Mandela Washington Fellow at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, 2018 recipient of the Equity and Merit Scholarship in Public Health at the University of Manchester, Advanced Nursing Certificate in Finland, and holds a Bachelor of Science in Nursing from Clark International University in Uganda. So, Dr. Zihindula, if you'd like to take the microphone, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll be talking a bit about the project that we started that was born in March 2022. And I believe our project has a right to have a nationality of Ireland because the baby was conceived and born here. And I'm going to quickly go through with you on how this happened and which room we used. And who were the witnesses. Ours had witnesses. It's unlike the other conception which no one sees, but ours had witnesses. And that was driven from the conversation we had after we had sat together, listened to the things that are happening with the Creative Brain Week, and starting to think from my public health background, I was like, how on earth can art, how can song just change a situation? And for me, the actual thing was, I grew up playing guitar. Guitar is like in my blood, and I was like, I never knew what I would do with guitar. I just play guitar for no reason. Until I discovered that, oh, my guitar can also change a situation somewhere. And then we went together, and we decided to go back in our rooms at the hotel where we stayed last time here. And then we started planning along the road and say, let's see who's going to be the mother and the father of this child that we really want to make sure we get here. Thank you. So we started thinking together about some discussions related to refugee issues, specific. And when we heard about issues of trauma, because this was the dominant term in our conversation, and we were like, when people talk about trauma, I don't wish anyone to experience trauma if you never experienced trauma. But I stood in those shoes and I imagined me being a person with lived experience of forced migration, but also having experienced every type of trauma. If there are degrees in trauma, I believe that I had experienced most of the degrees of trauma. And if there are levels, if there are a quantification of trauma, I believe that I have gone through them. But I could see that in our conversation there was a side, an attribution, wanting to say that trauma can only affect such group of people, and it can unlikely affect such group of people, or in a different way, in a different context. And we thought, what about refugees? What about people who are displaced because of war, because of any other condition that we know? And I would not be unable to finish without saying that I'm born in the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo. And I've heard this question every day, and it was one of the questions that caused us to really start driving this idea to say, if I was born in Congo, and we have lost 11 million lives now since the war started in my country, and we question what makes some countries calling such a genocide, Holocaust, and who determines the other countries not to be calling it a genocide? There is someone who makes such decisions, and we don't know them. But that was a driving force for us to start thinking deeply about who says what and who decides where are we going to direct our solidarity in support of people in forced migration, but also in thinking on how deeply can they experience trauma, which leads them to many times deciding to commit suicide, because those were the information we were sharing in those times. And when they decide to commit suicide, many of the references in their paper we're reading that day would show us that no, they get referred to as people who have been through substance abuse. They refer to as people who have been bewitched in our context in Africa, because that's how we perceive such conditions. But then we learn that thing that we also live in a continent with very short-staffed amount of healthcare workers. But also, even if we have some healthcare workers, we may not have those who are specialized in the field. If we have those who are special in the field, we don't have free healthcare. It may be hard for people to get resources, funding, to pay for that fee, to get the services they need. Then we started thinking this can be materialized. We can do something for the refugee community from what we've learned at the Creative Brain Week in March 2022. Please, next slide. And then we left the place. We got in our room, and this is the group that we thought together. So this is not an individual task. Most of the group here, not most, all of them are fellows, Atlantic Fellows from very different programs. But that is the room that we used to birth the child, as I mentioned it. It was my room, so I hope that child will also give me the same identity here and throw away the refugee ship. And we then met with the Hasina Bongiwe, who is here again this time, I believe. And the only reason why we dragged Bongiwe were like, Bongiwe, you have talents. You know how to do these things. This music you play can make a difference in our refugee community in Africa, not only here. You did it here, it's beautiful. What about where we're coming from? Because Teresa says a good statement. She says, if you want to change the world, go back home first, love your home. Then you can change the world. And I believe in that statement. So I told her, let's go home and love home and change the narrative. Then we will continue to do it to the global. And this was the picture that we took on the left, my left, before we could move from the venue to the hotel room and to start crafting, thinking, what do we want to look at? What are the real cause factors? How do we really tackle those cause factors without resource? Because we knew, and we still know right now, that resources are directed strategically to places that none of us have control over or decision. It's either the funder will decide this money goes there, and they may not care about what will it be doing if it went to a certain group of people. And that is not our business anyway, because we don't depend on funding and we don't decide on who gives funding. But our business was, how can we use the resources we have, the skills we have learned from this Creative Brain Week, and go there and see if we can change narratives and see if we can talk better and try to bring the refugee communities to a situation where perhaps the learning from this project can help us to start now going through the issues of trauma in a different way, responding to trauma in a different way, but also using these resources that is within the community to respond to issues of trauma. We may go to the next slide, please. And so this is a background we knew, that is, we repeated here to make sure that we understand what it was about. We looked at the amount of refugees in South Africa, and we also looked at the amount of refugees in Uganda. And we also documented some of the situations that have, the studies that have been conducted, and looking at what are the challenges, trying to compare them to what can trigger issues of mental health among refugees, who most of them, according to studies, are already traumatized. Like my previous presenter mentioned, they come from challenging backgrounds. Others had it very hard to get to their destination, and that can also have an effect, an impact to their life, to their mental well-being. And that where in the reception of the host country, they still face some issues that have been documented and which we also empirically collected through them during our focus group discussions. And this background was to really help us to set this context and also understand the amount of people that we are trying to stand or to raise or amplify voices for. Let's go to the next slide, which has more of my important content. I'll literally read it quickly to mention, to make sure that we're together. So this reads, a number of people who are displaced went beyond 100 million globally in May 2022. That's last year. While the Ukrainian crisis dominated responses since February 2022, African refugees have fewer options with less support than ever. Within days of Russia invading Ukraine, this amount of billion in support was pledged by countries. The European Union activated a directive allowing 5 million Ukrainians to enter the bloc and access work, study, services without applying for asylum. In contrast, the EU continues to mount policies to deter Africans and Asians, including Africans living in Ukraine. African humanitarian responses face unprecedented funding shortage. Service providers have been forced to cut food rations, reduce water, and cut hygiene kits by up to 50%. And Care International has this report to the world to say that the world's top 10 most overlooked humanitarian crises each year, in 2022, all 10 of them were in Africa. According to this report, over 2 million online articles were written about Ukrainian war, more than for 41 other crises combined. And there were 3 times more the other articles that have been also written in other departments. I don't want to read that because it's hidden by my image. It's fine, but I believe everyone can read up to the end. Let's go to the next slide, which has this content explained. So I really couldn't want to finish this presentation without talking about the most important piece, which we titled A Blind Spot. And I wanted to call it a blind spot, but the beauty of this blind spot is because it ties with the theme of our Brain Week. There is always hope, but there's also conflict. And the conflict is, why should we go there? We want to go there. Let's ignore the blind spot. Why should we support that? We want to support this. These are blind spots. Known, seen, experienced, but there is a decision to decide where to go. And these are left unseen, untouched, as if they never existed. If you look at the amount of articles published between only January 2022 to October 2022, these are billions of articles with evidence of the amount of people who need humanitarian aid in countries like Mali. But blind spot, no one cares about that. And so it is. I can't read the whole image, but I'm sure you can read because it's clear here. And this talks a lot to what drove our decision to start thinking about experiences of trauma from the origin of these refugees, the forced migrant, and how they get this how do you call it? I'm a French speaker, by the way, so be careful. Sometimes I'll switch in French. So it amplifies. It becomes more broader. It becomes more, the impact grows in a way that it becomes more challenging to this person who could not cope from origin and now getting to the host and experiencing a more complex situation, a more challenging situation. It really affects, it expands the effects, the negative effect. And I wanted to conclude by the next slide to say that one of the reasons why we could not ignore that, it was because when we came closer, we brought these leaders of refugees. That was our methodology. We had to understand where they come from. And we had to ask them, how was the situation like where you came from? Because you don't want to bring also what you assume being a support to people who may not need that support. Maybe they prefer a different way of dealing with their issues, which may be cultural, which may be religious, which may be totally different from what we believe could help them to go through the issues of trauma. And I first met them as we were standing there. Those were really few of them, but in one province in South Africa. And then the next time again we met and we said, let's now sit and engage every stakeholder, but we've got to have a plan. Who do we engage? Who's interested? Who's willing to support? And then we brought this team together. And when we brought them together, we believed that all together we can have a day then when we sit and start drafting, crafting, what can we do? How do we respond to these issues? Because they listed a bunch of issues. They listed not having documents. They listed not having access or acceptance to schools, to social services like any other. And now for people who follow media, in South Africa where I was based, there is a movement that was really dominant, which we called Operation Dudula, which would civilian organized, going to the street. If you're not born in South Africa and you're Black African, pack your stuff, leave the country. They literally destroyed every business owned by non-South African. And this became more troublesome to these people. And we wanted to understand, what else would you want beyond this? How do we really navigate this challenge together with you? Because we knew that it really contributes more to their trauma experience. And we started then building from these meetings. We start building responses. We start building what can we do and how can we do it to respond to this. But I won't talk about that because my time is over. I will leave the last 4 slides to Rose, who's my colleague, my fellow whom we applied the grant together with the rest of the team on the picture, to complete the last 4 slides, which has the outcome of this project, but also which has some of the conclusion that we reached or the next step of this advocacy project on mental health for refugees in Uganda and in South Africa. I will leave in to Rose to complete the rest.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Ganzamungu, for the presentation that you have made. Please bear with me, the internet connectivity challenges, more so when you're connecting from the global south, where I'm connecting from. So it's a reward experience. But I'll start off by saying, I believe that today's greatest inequalities can only be fought if we leverage the power of intersectionality, interdisciplinarism, and be able to then bring our all different unique perspectives to be able to forge a way forward. So please share my slides. And yes, as the Atlantic Fellows who came together on this project, the previous slide, we all were coming from different disciplines and different nationalities, most of us. So we utilized, as Ganza said, focus group discussions to help us understand what exactly did the refugees describe as mental health related challenges that were associated to their movements or to their current stay within the countries, the host countries. And also we wanted to know what were they prescribing as proposed solutions. In South Africa, we worked with the refugee-led organizations, and we were able to understand that the issues that they faced, the mental health issues that they faced, originated from even before they arrived in the host country. It's the journey, the trek that they made to the country, which is so brutal for them. It's first with trauma, it's first with torture, arrest, death of loved ones on the way as they come. The women, most especially the women, face sexual abuse. They lose a sense of belonging, knowing that you never see your family again. Illnesses that they encounter along the way. And en route to South Africa, these are still the same challenges that they were facing. But within the host country, the challenges were quite unique. For example, there was the withdrawal of residence permits, which hindered them to be able to access even simple services such as banking services, but also issues as regards to Afrophobia, and because of the segregation that occurs, or discrimination, you might call it, they failed to access social services, even an inability to access, for example, education services, hospital services. And this is not only limited to those who are old, but also to their children, for example. And they also talked about other diseases that they faced, they had diseases, but they realized that all these kind of challenges that they went through automatically leads to a mental health illness. In fact, one refugee asked me, if you ask a refugee in South Africa whether they've ever suffered from a mental health illness, then you don't know what the definition of a refugee is in the African context. Next slide, please. And then in Uganda, we also, through a youth refugee organization, which we worked with, we met refugees, most especially who are youth, and then we had focus group discussions with them to understand what are the prevalent mental health challenges that they face. They pointed to depression, trauma, and stress, but they also talked about how these normally originate. Some of them are still facing attacks even within the host sites, where people whom they left behind in the wars, in the countries they originated from, come and then look for them and then attack them within the host country. But they also talked about the lack of unemployment, which leads to poverty, but also the low education levels as they face challenges to progress through the education ladder in Uganda. And this makes living within the host country somehow unbearable, but also even access to these services, the discrimination associated with this access to these services makes it also a challenge for them to really integrate within the host countries. They recommended that a vocational school be set up for them, so that if they cannot access the tertiary institutions, they can at least have vocational skills that they can later on exploit for a source of living. But then also they wanted some activities like music and sports, which can distract their minds from the trauma that they face back home and enable them to relax and create a sense of belonging with even the host community. They also believe that if this change is to happen, they should be at the forefront of this change. I think Dominic spoke about it well. There is nothing for us without us. And that is what they want going forward. Next slide, please. So what next for our project is we want to publish an op-ed about the contextual situation of refugees in the eastern part of Africa vis-a-vis the western part of Africa. What are the challenges they meet, the commonalities, but what also are the recommendations that they propose going forward? We want also to design a holistic project, and we want to do this in a co-creation manner that enables us and the refugee leaders to respond to the refugee challenges that we mentioned before. And we also would need funding to conduct a training of trainers for the refugees on mental health prevention strategies, but also how to mobilize community support for community mental health, And then we also want to conduct a trauma-informed care awareness with institutions that are primary providers of services to refugees, like hospitals, schools, refugee social services, and the non-government organizations that work in these settings. But also we want to take advantage of the different unique abilities of each stakeholder working on this issue to coalesce efforts towards addressing the challenges that we mentioned before. Next slide, please. So these were the Atlantic Fellows that we worked with. I think the picture you saw it, as Ganza showed you, Alex Konuva from Peru, Bongiwe, who's with you there, Hasina from South Africa, I myself from Uganda, and Susan Rowe, who's from New Zealand. Thank you so much for listening to us.
So thank you to Rosemary Nakame and Ganzamungu Zihindula, Dr. Ganzamungu Zihindula, for introducing complexity, brains in bodies and bodies in context, which require all sorts of different approaches to firstly understanding what is happening, and secondly how you might intervene or respond or arrive with appropriate music and appropriate steps to take. And the last piece of news, I suppose, starts there. It starts with trying to make different sorts of knowledge. So, on stage I have Anusha Yosada-Mohan, and Dr. Yosada-Mohan is a postdoctoral research fellow at Trinity College Institute of Neuroscience and School of Psychology. But she's also a trained Bharatanatyam and Bollywood dancer. She's one of the lead organizations of the International Tinnitus Research Initiative Foundation's Dissertation and Communication Wing. And she's co-developer with Magda Kaczmarska of Brain FM, which is what they're going to talk about. Magda, who hopefully is joining us by the power of the goddess of the internet, hey, is a dancer, teaching artist, creative aging advocate based in New York City. She's a thought leader who uses co-creative community dance as a vehicle for belonging and well-being. She leverages a dual background in neuropharmacological research and in dance to build bridges that empower individuals and communities to be active agents in their creativity and brain health. And she also, each one teach one, mentors future leaders in the creative and health sector through regular partnership at the Ford O'Malley School of Dance in New York, the Arts and Madison Fellowship in Lagos, Nigeria. She's a representative to the UN with Generations United and is on the executive committee of the UN NGO Committee on Aging. So they're fantastic people for introducing to the range of conversation in Creative Brain Week. Anusha.
Do you want to go, Magda?
Sure. Good afternoon to you all. Thank you so much, Dominic, for this introduction and for this welcome. And I also want to take a moment to thank all of the previous speakers. I honor you and thank you so much for all of the service and the work that you do on behalf of this very, very important topics and work and for these people. It feels like I needed to honor that before transitioning into what we are going to speak about. I also wanted to take a moment to thank you, Creative Brain Week, Global Brain Health Institute, Trinity College Dublin, as we're reflecting on the previous Creative Brain Week, the inaugural Creative Brain Week, which holds a especially special place in my heart, because although Anusha and I had already existed in partnership prior to that time, this time in Dublin, Ireland, where you're sitting right now, is where Anusha and I first met in person for the first time. And well, you'll get to learn what we've been doing since. So you've already introduced us. So I think maybe, Anusha, how do you feel? Shall we maybe continue? Is there anything else you wanted to say about yourself before we share slides?
No, I think that's about it. Dominic has given a wonderful introduction to both of us. So yeah, no, thank you so much for it. And yeah, Magda's a beautiful speaker, as you already know. So I don't have to, I just want to say I second whatever she said. So thank you very much for this.
Ditto.
In the interest, ditto. In the interest of time, ditto.
Wonderful. Well, maybe please share slides. Wonderful. So we're here to speak with you about Brain FM. And Anusha and I created Brain FM out of a desire to unite our shared passions and our interest in dance and neuroscience. And we also have obviously lived experience in these. So yes, we're both geeks in a wonderful way. And so Brain FM is an educational tool that uses dance as a way to learn about neuroscience, the brain, and brain health. And we see Brain FM as a true reflection of both of our personalities as well as our practices coming together as one entity. And our intention for Brain FM is as a vehicle for agency, awareness, and community building. Oh, can we go back, please?
I think we're one slide too. We've lost the surprise element, I guess.
Oh, it's okay.
No, it's all good.
There's more to come. We've got some more surprises in the pocket.
What you see here in the pictures is actually what a typical Brain FM session looks like. In a typical Brain FM session, there's usually two parts. There's one part which is a didactic session. So we have animations, we have pictures, we have videos, and I'm here very animatedly trying to put this very complex concept of neuroscience and brain science and brain health into simpler terms for our audience to understand, hopefully using either geeky animations I've created or geeky animations other people have created and taking credit for them. Not really. We give credit to our people who've made the videos. But, and usually there's a second part that's led by my wonderful colleague here who translates the content that I explain through these visual aids into movement. And Magda here is going to give us a little snippet of what a Brain FM session looks like. And all of us here are going to experience a short 1-minute Brain FM session. Magda?
Thank you, Anusha. So I would like to give you a short example of one of our sessions. And in this one, we were learning about brain waves. So now if we can please go to the next slide. So Anusha would have introduced the concept of brain waves. And here you can see an example. And on the slide, you can see a delta wave, which is a very slow moving wave. And you can see that represented with that little black ball that's moving over the crest and the dips of the wave. And it's fairly slow. And after this didactic explanation from Anusha, I would now invite participants to experience this frequency of this wave in their bodies. So, of course, if any of you know me, of course, I'm going to get you to move. So either if you're joining from your homes or your offices, or for those of you in the hall, in the audience hall, I invite you to take a look at this wave and find a way to explore this within your body. Maybe it's with your arm, maybe it's with your hand or just a finger, but start to feel that same frequency in your body. And maybe you'll find it in a different part of your body, maybe your torso. Now, those of you who have the benefit of being in shared community in one space, I invite you to take a look at your neighbor and see if without speaking, you can find that same rhythm, that same tempo in unison with the person next to you. Yeah, maybe even find a way to have it grow and expand. Excellent. I saw some of you, which is so exciting. Thank you. Thank you, Lynn, or whoever was doing all of that. Yay! Congrats. Fantastic. So after this, we would now proceed into the other brain waves, which go into different speeds and frequencies. And we get an opportunity to experience how those feel in our bodies. And then we connect this concept into an application in participants' lived experience. So in this case, we're looking at the delta wave. So if we can please have the next slide. So the delta wave occurs during deep sleep. And so we together with participants explore some ways that we can embody an experience of deep sleep into movements. And in this way, connect and build this embodied story alongside this newly learned content. And then we finish each session by dancing this story that we've co-created together. So I'll pass it on to Anusha, and I want to give you all a big round of applause for taking a risk and trying something with us today.
So
Anusha,
Magda's done both. Yeah, so Magda's done my part too. So I think we can all give both of us a pat on our back. So she's translated the neuroscience beautifully. So you can see the power of Brain FM, that it really helps people with very minimal background in the subject to actually grasp the concept and deliver and understand the concept. And that's really what Brain FM does. And that's what we do in a Brain FM session. And we've been incredibly lucky. And if you want to go over to the next slide, we'll see our participants and our champions of Brain FM. And our first champion, we've been incredibly lucky that a lot of people have believed in Brain FM and supported our journey throughout in the last year and a half almost. We conducted our first Brain FM session during START, during European Researchers Night 2021, and it was supported by the Office of Dean of Research by Jennifer Daly. She was the first one to seed this initiative, and we did this with primary school children. We were overbooked. We had 2 sessions, and all online. And we also did this with researchers, and we did this with the projects that they presented in European Researchers Night. Next, our big break was obviously during Creative Brain Week 2022, where Dominic and Bea were incredibly generous to take us on board, and they gave us 4 slots, so we did something every day. And we have one of our colleagues here, Nick Johnson, who was our supporter during one of our sessions. Thank you, Nick. And we piloted this with 4 different populations. So we did this with children, we did this with people with dementia, we did this in the community, and we did this with professionals. And one of our great professionals who attended this event is sitting right in front of us. So we had the honor of making Brian Lawler dance to our songs and Bollywood.
And he was wonderful, Brian.
Oh, he said he was not going to do anything, and then he was out there playing tennis and everything, so it was amazing. So we actually talked about, we specifically talked about the concept of modifiable risk factors of dementia. We talked about hearing, physical fitness, and social connection, and how we could, different ways of how we could improve these 3, and we talked about this through our Brain FM session. And basically what Creative Brain Week 2022 did for us was actually give us this incubation period and to try it out in different populations, get people's feedback, and actually there was somebody who saw what we did in Creative Brain Week and reached out to us from Donegal and asking us to give us a session of Brain FM online for primary school children in Donegal. So Creative Brain Week basically opened this up, threw it open wide for us and actually gave us a platform to pilot this on a bigger scale. So thank you. So Magda, so what are our next steps? Maybe
Thanks, Anusha. I really appreciate actually you giving me tips because all I can see on this is the screen and myself. So thank you for that. Our next steps for Brain FM are focusing on developing Brain FM as an educational resource for primary school students and teachers. So we've had an opportunity now to connect online with several schools across Dublin and actually across Ireland. And we've had wonderful feedback, but we would treasure an opportunity to dive a little bit deeper into this work in collaboration with the Global Brain Health Institute and Trinity College Dublin Office of Dean of Research, or START, which Jenny Daly is the director of, and Anusha mentioned her. And so in partnership with these organizations, we're really looking forward to some work together this April on site in person in Dublin to deliver some Brain FM events in public schools, as well as in various community and cultural spaces and museums. So over back to you, Anusha.
Yeah,
to sum it all up.
So thank you to GBHI, thank you to Creative Brain Week, thank you to Office of Dean of Research, and thank you to a lot of other sponsors who've supported this wonderful, wonderful opportunity for us to bring Brain FM to specifically primary schools. And through Brain FM, we want to develop a pedagogical practice with specifically 3 goals and visions. So one is that it's a model for intentional ways and powerful ways that kids can actually see that science and the arts can come together. It's not 2 different things, but it can actually come together in very powerful ways. The second is that it actually cultivates spaces where children can show up as they want and how they want, and they know that the diversity of understanding that they bring into the space is actually valuable, and they can actually see live as to how they can build these equitable communities from a very young age. And the third, we know that education is a big modifiable risk factor for dementia, and we start young. So thank you.
So that brings us to the end of the news section. What happened from last year to this year? I'd like to thank all the speakers in the room and online. And then I'm going to hand over because we're going to pull out a little bit. Tomorrow morning we're going to start, as Dr. Zihindula was saying, we're going to start local. We're going to look at the long-term impact of conflict, drawing on research and knowledge from here. But we wanted to start by looking at what's generated small projects, bigger projects since last year, because we are always looking for where does this go next. So thank you to you both. And I'd like to invite you to leave, but I'd like to invite to the stage as we do an automatic swap over. Half of my job is getting people off and on stage. So thank you very much.